Hello, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Perfect Storm, HR in the Cloud, Market Trends and Key Considerations. My name is David Goodstein and I'm a webinar coordinator for the Outsourcing Institute. It is our pleasure to be the co-host of today's event with ISG. I'll be working in the background to help answer any technical or general questions that you may have. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly tell you about a few tools you are able to use throughout today's session. We encourage you at any time during the presentation to submit your questions to today's speakers. To do this, click on the question box, type your question in the space provided, and click the submit button. Today's webinar will be recorded and you will be receiving a follow-up email approximately 2 days, which will include a link with today's recorded webinar and presentation slides. The webinar recording and presentation slides will also be available at outsourcing.com. Now I'd like to say a few brief words about the Outsourcing Institute for those who are not familiar with us. The Outsourcing Institute is a professional association dedicated to providing independent best practices, tools, roadshow events, and networking opportunities for all forms of outsourcing. Located at outsourcing.com, we have 70,000 members globally. OI specializes in providing low-cost and no-cost alternatives for outsourcer buyers in need of RFP tools, vendor selection assistance, training, as well as general support and coaching. For those who are in this market, we offer an array of very targeted sponsorship and promotional opportunities. Our sister company, CMS, provides recruiting services for those seeking to hire outsourced professionals experienced at buying, selling, managing, or consulting in this arena. Our contact information is at the bottom of the screen for those who have any questions. Following, we have a few upcoming events that OI is planning. First, we have the OI Fall Roadshow focusing on outsourcing governance and relationship management. This roadshow event will be held on December 5th, 2012 in New York City. The following day in New York City is the Sales Readiness 2013 Summit. What outsourcing service providers need to succeed in the new year. January 29th in London, England, January 30th in Dallas, Texas, January 31st in Atlanta, Georgia. We're also planning the Wall Street Tech Conference show on March 13th, and we'll be covering what's known as T5, Sourcing, Cloud Computing, Big Data, Mobility, Security, and Compliance. To find more details, please visit outsourcing.com/events. So at this time, I will now turn it over to Stan Jones, Analyst in Emerging Technology at ISG.
Thanks, David, and thanks everyone on the call for joining us today. If you can't hear the background noise coming from my phone, that's great news. If you can, I apologize in advance. I had some travel plans go awry this morning. So instead of talking to you on a landline from my office, I'm talking to you from a mobile phone in a hotel lobby. So we'll try to fight through this. So Mary Beth and I are really excited about this topic. The reason we're so excited about HR in the cloud is that we've seen a huge increase in demand from our clients on this subject over the past 12 to 18 months. What's even better is that clients are genuinely excited about the promise these platforms promise to achieve to transform the way they work and how they interact with their workforces. So clearly, excitement around enterprise systems is not something that we typically hear, and clients are genuinely excited. When we walk into an HR organization to talk to them about HR SaaS, it could be because they're interested in new capabilities like mobile or analytics. It could be because they're frustrated with traditional IT models that are too slow, or it could be that they're facing the specter of a large, expensive upgrade and are wondering if that's worth it. Whatever the scenario, we always recommend to clients that we take a step back and look at the big picture. While software as a service does create some really compelling opportunities for clients, there's also some really serious considerations and trade-offs that clients need to evaluate. David, next slide. So that's really what we're going to focus on today. So we'll sort of start off with a brief level set on cloud. We'll then do a poll question. I'll hand it back to Mary Beth, and she'll take you through some of the key market trends, as well as a comparison of HR SaaS to HR BPO. And I'll close us out with some key considerations for potential buyers, and of course, leave plenty of time for questions at the end. So with that, let's jump right in. As we just discussed, whenever we have a SaaS discussion with clients, it's important to level set on cloud given the unbelievable amount of hype in the market today. Fortunately, the industry is generally coalescing around a standard framework for cloud. This has been developed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. While we're not going to go into a lot of detail on this framework today, it is important to understand that customers generally expect certain benefits from cloud, And these are really sort of represented on the left-hand side of your screen as characteristics of cloud. While these characteristics are fairly technical in nature, they really are the underpinning of many of the key benefits that customers expect from the software as a service, especially around the ability to access and deploy new features faster. Service delivery models are ways customers can buy cloud. Today we're focused on the SaaS or software as a service delivery model, which we'll talk about here more in just a minute. Finally, the way cloud is deployed to customers has a significant impact on operations, on commercial terms, security, and a bevy of other areas, and we'll also cover that here briefly in just a moment. Next slide. As we just discussed, delivery models are the ways customers can choose to buy cloud. We found that describing who is responsible for what up and down the application stack is a really helpful way to understand this. So here we have a standard technology stack broken out by 3 delivery models. As you can see, as we move from infrastructure as a service on the left to software service on the right, more and more operational responsibility is given to the provider. An important caveat here, just because the NIST framework defines infrastructure, platform, and software as a service this way does not mean that every provider and every product and every offering is going to fit into a nice, tidy bundle. Many providers are working up and down this stack, but it's a really good representation, especially when you start talking about management and operational responsibility, to be able to delineate between the 3 service delivery models. So once you make it to software as a service on the far right, as you can see, the provider manages nearly the entire stack. This is one of the key benefits of software as a service, and that it frees up a significant amount of operational responsibility from IT. But it's also one of the key stumbling blocks for clients, as they have to move from a mindset of managing technology to a mindset of managing a service. And oftentimes that service is most likely highly standardized, which again can cause client concerns around their unique business and IT requirements. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, the deployment model that a client chooses has a significant impact on how often you can expect feature updates, as well as on the pricing, contracting, and security requirements. This is primarily due to the fact that when clients choose a shared platform, as you can see on the left, a lot of times we are more and more calling public cloud shared and private cloud dedicated. Those words don't mean exactly the same thing, but in general, most software as a service solutions fit into this public cloud shared bucket. So when we're talking to clients around that, we have to explain and make sure that it's very clear that they're choosing to share the underlying infrastructure and software with other customers. This creates huge economies of scale for cloud providers and allows them to focus on innovation rather than on maintaining legacy code and support models. The customer gains a huge benefit here by seeing new capabilities much, much faster than the traditional on-premises model. But this sharing does come at a cost. In order to create these economies of scale, standardization is absolutely key. And it's not just the technology that needs to be standardized, it's the commercial terms like pricing, the contractual terms like liability, service level agreements, and data location, and the security architectures. This is really where most clients hit a wall on their SaaS journey. So with that, that ends our cloud level set. I'm going to open it up for a quick poll question, so we'd love to get your feedback on this. So David, if you can pull up the poll question. So our question today is, what's your current HR software deployment approach? So we'd like you to select one option here. So today, are you using licensed software, which is in your data center? Are you using licensed software that's hosted by a third party? Are you using software as a service today? Do you have a hybrid model, so you're using both software as a service and an on-premise hosted or hosted model? Or have you fully outsourced your HRIS systems? So we're going to give everyone another 15 seconds or so to answer, and then we'll ask David to pull up the answers. Okay, David, why don't we go ahead and pull up the answers? So as expected, and we typically see this a lot as we are working with clients, it's a mixed approach. Typically, though, on-premises software for HRIS is the most prevalent model. What we also, though, see is a significant amount of customers using software as a service on the periphery, particularly for talent management or recruiting. We're seeing this model a lot. And the desire to move more into the SaaS bucket is really where we're seeing a significant amount of demand today. So to take us through some of these key trends in the market, I'm going to hand it back to Mary Beth.
Thanks, Denton. Again, so what does this really mean as far as the HR ERP space? What we're finding is that Oracle and SAP are quickly expanding their cloud offerings, both organically as well as through acquisitions. SAP's acquisition of SuccessFactors earlier this year is a prime example, as is Oracle's acquisition of Taleo. What we're also finding is that from a system integration perspective, that the SIs are competing more and more importantly on their experience in implementing these new HR SaaS offerings. And they as well are doing this both organically as well as through acquisition, buying up some of the boutique specialty integration shops. Deloitte's acquisition of Aggressor, as well as most recently, Aon Hewitt on the provider side, acquisition of OmniPoint. Moving on to the next slide, I'd like to talk a little bit about market trends in the HR SaaS space. And what we're finding here is that Workday's native SaaS platform is performing very well in the large multinational market space. But contrary to popular belief, they are not the only solution out there. But what we are finding is that they are beginning to get a real commanding lead against the other solutions. Our clients that are currently in HR BPO arrangements, as well as those that aren't, are looking and exploring Workday as a possible replacement for their existing ERP endpoint solutions. Their goal is primarily to reduce their TCO, total cost of ownership, in large part by avoiding the future upgrade cost. They're also looking to benefit from an enhanced employee experience that the solution will deliver. Moving on to the next slide, I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into Workday. Recently at Workday Rising, I think it was communicated that Workday had 350 plus clients. And I believe that as part of today's first earnings call, they'll be a little bit more precise than that as they're ending their quiet period. But the bottom line is the growth in the Workday client base is impressive. They are signing up clients very rapidly. And what we have found in our software selection engagements is that Workday does compare very well to their competitors in the core HR functionality as well as in the talent management space. Clients are spending more time around due diligence around Workday's payroll solution. And those clients that are really looking for a global payroll solution, as Workday's is currently limited to U.S. and Canada, Workday is building relationships with Northgate Arenzo, Safeguard, and Patterson's to deliver a global payroll solution in more of an outsourced delivery model. But what we also want to point out is that HR SaaS and Workday in specific does not address those buyers that are still interested in outsourcing routine administration. So I'd like to move on to the next slide and do a little bit deeper dive on what that really means. Earlier, Stanton showed the different delivery models. What I want to focus on exclusively here is what's the difference between HR SaaS and HR BPO. Because what we have found is that right after clients have really made a decision around what they might want as far as their future software path, they're looking at the broader HR service delivery decision around specific questions about, well, who's going to be responsible for the configuration of our new SaaS solution? Who's going to be responsible for processing the administration that we still need? who's going to be responsible providing that Tier 1 call center support for our employees, and who's going to deliver that portal and knowledge management solution to really enable the employee self-sufficiency that's a part of our future state vision. So what we've boiled it down to is when you compare the two different delivery models, the difference is who's really responsible for the configuration, the transaction processing, the employee contact, and the employee portal and knowledge management. Under the SaaS solution delivery model, the client's really responsible for those. However, under the BPO, the provider is responsible. So that's what we have really decided are the primary distinctions. And before we go into, how does the client decide about which delivery model is really their best path forward, I'd like to introduce another poll question here to engage the audience. So on this quick poll, we'd like to know, what is your preferred HR software deployment approach 24 months from now? Again, the same options as before. 24 months from now, do you think you'll still have licensed software on-premise? Will it be licensed software hosted, SaaS, subscription-based, a hybrid, or outsourced, software and process? So we'll give you a few minutes there to log your vote. Let's take a look at what our results are telling us. Okay, so 24 months from now, we're seeing pretty much a split here between licensed on-premise, still at 30%, SaaS 30%, hybrid 30%, and outsourced, software and the process at 10%. Again, a bit of a shift from current, reflecting the trend of more clients looking at alternative delivery models. So with that, I'd like to move on to the next slide and talk about, well, how does the client really make that decision about how they are going to deploy their software? What we encourage clients to do is look at both the financial and the non-financial aspects of the question. And what we've found is, in large part, it depends on really what's their current state and what the gap is really from moving the current to the desired future state. So for those clients that really have not been operating in a HR shared service center model, or they have already decided to move to an HR BPO model, so they either don't have or don't own a lot of the shared service center technology, the portal, and the knowledge management solution, as well as they don't have the headcount any longer in-house. For those clients, from a financial standpoint, they can probably receive and get to their desired future state cheaper via HR BPO. When the non-financial attributes are considered, especially around speed, complexity, and demand on internal resources, for the same client, they can probably get to their future state with less risk and faster through the HR BPO route. However, that answer could be very different for those clients that are already operating in a shared service delivery model, and they have the resources to make that transition. So again, the roadmap and the path to that future state will vary, but in large part, we found it's a function of what the gap is from their current state to their future state, and we're weighing both the financial and the non-financial aspects. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to my colleague Stanton to talk about some of those considerations that buyers will face.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Yeah, so there are some quite significant considerations that come up during the contracting process. We've listed out a few here. I'm going to touch on some of the key ones that we see pretty consistently across the projects where we engage clients. Mary Beth mentioned earlier global payroll capability. So there is sort of a view and a vision, and the way we framed this is the items on the left really are sort of the vision of what SaaS should be. And the stuff on the right is sometimes the reality. Sometimes the reality does actually meet the vision. Oftentimes it does not. Sometimes it's usually in the middle. And that's where we spend a lot of our time, is sort of breaking through that vision to really figure out what is reality for our client. One of the key ones that we see quite a bit is the idea that SaaS providers have a global payroll capability. As Mary Beth mentioned, there is a distinction between having a global payroll capability and having sort of a native capability where it's all running within your software. What we see is most of the SaaS providers are using a third-party approach where they'll have potentially a payroll capability for North America, but they're going to be partnering to take advantage of payroll in other parts of the world. Sometimes that's an issue for clients. Sometimes it's not. It doesn't mean that it can't happen. It's important to make sure that clients understand that it doesn't mean that all the payroll is running through Workday or one of the other HR SaaS platforms. Integration is another really, really big area that we spend a lot of time on with clients, and really kind of from two angles. Number one, a lot of times what we see happening is that IT is sometimes not brought into the discussion until very late in the game. Integration typically is very high on the list for IT, but oftentimes it's very low on the list for the business. So the idea that especially for very large organizations, you could have upwards of 100 interfaces into the HR system. So therefore, it's really critical that clients look at how many interfaces exist today, and then the second part of that is, where do those interfaces go? Are they on-premise interfaces, or are they interfaces back out into the cloud? Typically, cloud-based applications will work better together, and they'll work more natively together than an on-premise to cloud application. That's changing and improving over time. And it's a broad generalization. Some on-premise solutions work fine with cloud-based solutions. But generally what we find is that the more it exists in the cloud, the more it can be taken advantage of and integrate through APIs, the easier it is for clients to be able to move forward with this integration. Another really key one is the promise that SaaS eliminates customization. While that's for the most part true, most SaaS solutions you will not be able to customize in the traditional sense. So in the traditional model, a business requirement comes up, a specification is created, that specification is handed to IT, it's built, tested, and then moved to production, and sometimes that can take days, sometimes that can take weeks, sometimes it can take months, and sometimes it never happens. That model does not exist for the most part with SaaS. The reason that is, as we talked about on the delivery models, that layer is abstracted from the clients, and the provider manages that. What SaaS solutions do provide you, though, is a really, really robust configuration layer. So the ability to go in and do things through configuration that you used to be able to do through code, but not everything. And so that's one of the key constraints that we see is, can customers fit into the configuration box that the SaaS provider is bringing to the table? And so a lot of times we will spend time with clients helping them to understand, here are the available configuration options, and then helping them to understand, here's where they are today, and can they then change the way they're working in order to fit into the SaaS configuration bucket. Mary Beth also mentioned TCO. This is a really, really big one. And the reason this is a really big one is, again, there's usually an expectation when clients move to SaaS that it will be more cost effective. What we're finding, not always the case, but as a general rule, SaaS becomes cost effective as long as one significant upgrade is avoided. And so what that means is, typically companies are not going to be upgrading their ERP systems every year. That could be 3, 5, even 7 years away. And so as long as a significant capital outlay can be avoided, and also the organizational energy that's required to make that upgrade happen, if that can be avoided and the business case then for SaaS lasts 3, 5, maybe even 7 years, then it does, in terms of TCO, become very cost effective. That's also, though, a surprise to clients when we talk about that because, again, we go back to the characteristics of cloud. When clients are used to talking about cloud, it's the idea of I want to get in, get out, only pay for what I use, and I hadn't thought that I would be signing up for 3, 5, maybe even 7 years. But we are finding that that longer-term commitment is going to be required to be able to make an effective business case. It's also a key consideration from a cash flow perspective. The rationale here is that most SaaS providers, as a starting point in negotiations, will ask for a significant portion of the total contract fees up front. It's going to vary by provider what's asked for, but that's, again, a real shock to clients when an expectation has been put in place around the vision that you're only paying for what you use and you're only paying per seat. But when you have to pay per seat up front for potentially a year's worth of service or more, that can be quite jarring to clients. Also, the ability to provide IT with the comfort that the solution is secure is a huge stumbling block for organizations. One of the key reasons it's a stumbling block is because if the solution is shared, and we talked about earlier, most software as a service solutions are public cloud, shared multi-tenant architectures, that the SaaS provider is not going to allow the same level of audit that a traditional on-premise, maybe a hosted vendor would. The rationale there is that a hosted vendor, that infrastructure and software is dedicated to you, they may let the IT team actually come in and look at the infrastructure, look at the software, maybe even go into the cage within the data center to evaluate it and audit. In a SaaS model, that's all shared across hundreds, maybe even thousands of customers. And if the SaaS provider allowed each customer to come in and audit the solution, they're then breaking the confidentiality and security agreements that they've made with every other client. So that's a huge hurdle for clients to get over, especially large IT organizations. It's the idea that they have to trust, but it's difficult to verify. And the way that they have to verify is through the transparency that the provider provides through ISO certification, for example. So instead of the IT team being able to get in there and really dig in, they have to rely on audit reports. And that's a huge shift for some organizations. Some are making that shift, and some are not. The last kind of key consideration we wanted to make sure prospective buyers are aware of is around data location. So again, most multi-country or global companies are going to have operations in various parts of the world, and the location of the data becomes a huge sticking point in negotiation. One of the key constructs around SaaS, again, is that in general, the provider is not going to disclose where the data is because the data may actually be spread out across various data centers in order to improve performance and reliability. Some SaaS providers will divulge that, some won't. And if they won't divulge where the data center is, then it makes it very difficult for organizations to know where their data is. There's some really interesting work being done by the European Commission. You can see on the bottom of this slide here around Article 29. If you have not seen that, I encourage you to Google that. So that's the European Commission's viewpoint on cloud computing. And today, at least, that viewpoint is very much at odds with the direction that a lot of US-based SaaS providers are heading. So with that, we actually targeted this for about 30 minutes. We wanted to make sure to save plenty of time for questions and any feedback you might have. So with that, I'd like to take just a couple of minutes and briefly introduce you to ISG. So next slide. So ISG is a global advisory services and market intelligence company. We're made up of 3 brands: TPI, which is the founder of the sourcing advisory space; Compass, which is a premier benchmarking and performance improvement company; and FTA, which is a premier independent provider of advisory services to the U.S. public sector. Next slide. We're really proud of the fact that ISG is a global company. We have very, very deep capabilities in all parts of the world, in both the Americas, in EMEA, and in Asia Pacific. And actually, we're very proud of the fact that we need to update this slide because now we're just a tick over 800. Next slide. We're also very proud of the fact that we continue to advise on a really, really large share of the total contract value awarded in the market, 25%. As you can see, having advised over $330 billion in total contract value, we feel like that puts us in a really, really strong position as we're advising clients. We're also really proud of the fact that the clients we serve are very large, so we serve 75% of the global Forbes Global 100. And also, if you've not had an opportunity to join one of our TPI indexes, we do encourage you to do so. So those are held each quarter. If you Google TPI index, we hold those in all regions of the world. And in that index, we opine on the state of the global sourcing industry. So with that, I think it's time to open it up for questions. Let's see if we've got some questions. So Mary Beth, I don't know if you've had a chance to look through any of the questions yet. I'm looking down here right now. Okay, it looks like we've got a question around security and risk in both models. I would imagine with both models we're talking about, and if I'm not, please, if this is not correct, please let me know on the chat or on the question on the question box. So I would imagine that we're talking about SaaS versus BPO and the security risks from both. Security is a huge, huge stumbling point, to be quite frank, in SaaS negotiations. The real key reason that a lot of times these get hung up is because, as I mentioned earlier, IT is not brought into the discussion until very late in the game. Sometimes that's by design, that the HR organization, or frankly any other part of the organization that is looking to buy SaaS, oftentimes does not want to bring IT into the solution because they feel like they're going to slow it down. But in our opinion, what happens then, it will slow down no matter what because of this security and risk questions that will be brought up as soon as the contract hits procurement or legal's desk. So in answer to your question, typically what we're starting to see is that for BPO, more and more BPO providers are starting to use software as a service as the engine that they use to provide those back office services. That's more and more being called BPaaS, so business process as a service, where the back office and administrative functions and processes have been outsourced, but they're being done so on a SaaS platform. And the real benefit to that then is that the buyer of those services gets to take advantage of the cool, slick new features that, for example, a Workday and many other HR SaaS providers have around mobile, for example, so the ability to tap into your HR system on your iPhone. So in my opinion, that those security risks are going to be very, very similar across both models. And the recommendation advice is make sure and bring IT into the discussion very early so that a lot of these questions can start to get on the table. There's no easy answer to them, and it's not a binary right or wrong. I mean, what we are seeing is successful organizations are partnering across HR, procurement, legal, compliance, and partnering to find ways to change internally in order to adapt these SaaS solutions. Let's see if there's. I'm looking through the question. There's another question on unanticipated challenges that can arise with integrating SaaS into existing infrastructure. It's a great question, and this is a real biggie. And again, there is no silver bullet here. Most HR systems have been built up today, and so, for example, and I think the poll question showed that most are still sort of using an on-premise in our data center model. And over the years, hundreds potentially of interfaces have been built up into payroll providers and benefit providers and other software as a service solutions. And so one of the things that we are starting to see, and I would still say that this is emerging, is that, again, bringing IT into the conversation and treating SaaS as a strategic direction for the organization rather than as a one-off, especially when we're talking about core HR here. We're not just talking about items on the periphery. We are talking about core HR, workforce administration, and payroll. And when you talk about the core, then that's really where those interfaces go. So one of the models that we are seeing is bringing the architecture teams in early and talking about, rather than replicating all of these interfaces back out to the cloud, let's build a repository internally so that the cloud solution has one endpoint back into the data center, and then those legacy interfaces go back to one endpoint in the data center, rather than having to try to replicate and rebuild and build APIs and ask your providers to provide APIs to tap into these solutions. I think that's an emerging model, but that's a model that we're starting to see at more and more clients. So I'm going to look through another couple of questions here. Mary Beth, do you see any? I'm just going to continue to look through these here.
Dan, it looks like we've got a question here around business requirements and what organizations are looking for and what the impact might be on cloud. So I'd be happy to take that one.
Okay.
What we've been finding is that clients are really looking for that consumer-grade experience, and they're looking for the analytics that will really support, the business decisions that they're facing. So they're looking for mobile. They're looking for social, and they're looking for big analytics. And the native SaaS solutions, the ground-up SaaS solutions are really positioned better to deliver on that consumer-grade experience, while the big analytics, again, we have some of our ERP solutions that are a little bit farther down the road on that one as far as the developing of their analytics. But what we're also seeing is that analytics, are being integrated throughout the process, so that it's more seamless in these new offerings.
Thanks, Mary Beth. I think there's another question here that I think is quite interesting, and this really spans across both the business and IT, and it's sort of a question around unanticipated training costs. One of the really interesting changes that software as a service spawns is this idea, and we talked about this earlier, that the whole idea of customization starts to go away. It does not mean clearly when we start talking about interfaces and things like that, there could be some pretty deep customization or deep building required in order to build interfaces. But when we're talking about the core platform, what's really interesting is that those types of skills of building new capabilities in software sometimes actually don't translate to the new capability of configuring the software. So a developer might not necessarily be the right person, although they may be very, very good today at customizing the software or the on-premise software, they may not be the right person to go configure the software. So what we're starting to see, and again, I would say this is still emerging at this point, is the identification of a new type of person that is more of a business analyst, a technical business analyst that really deeply understands HR, but then also sort of sits in between that customization and configuration area that can translate new requirements into the configuration into the system. And sometimes, and more, and this is an area that the SaaS providers are pouring huge amounts of resources into, is that configuration framework can get exceptionally complex and robust, right? And so that ability to have those kinds of people to do that rather than the people that you need to go customize software are starting to become very much in demand, and we're finding that clients are looking for and starting to train those kinds of people. Mary Beth, do you want to tackle I think we can maybe have time for one more. Do you want to tackle, it looks like there's a question on, what's a good starting point for HR organizations?
Okay. So the question is, given all the variables and considerations for HR organizations considering cloud, what's really the starting point, and how do you ensure you don't go down the wrong path? What we have found is, again, the starting point is really, to do an assessment, to take an assessment around, what do you want your future state service delivery model to be, and not to just look at the technology component of the service delivery model, but to look at the other aspects, of the delivery model, including services, the in-source, the outsource, the co-sourced element. The structure side, how are we going to structure ourselves to support the future state delivery model? How are we going to transform our processes in order to, support the future state delivery model? Those are, just some of the elements that we work with our clients to make sure that when they're approaching the future state delivery model, they're doing it from a holistic standpoint and not just looking at the one arm of, what should our technology be in the future. So that would be my, number one point is, take a step back, look at it holistically, and also take a look at both the financial and the non-financial aspects of those various attributes of your delivery model.
Thanks, Mary Beth. It looks like we've got one more question that's just come in. So the question's around when clients move from on-premises to SaaS, how do they manage realigning the resources that are there primarily for supporting the on-premises solution? That's a great question. It kind of ties back to what we were just talking about. I think sometimes it depends, and it depends if the client has already outsourced or not. If they have not outsourced, and to be perfectly candid with you, this is still very, very new, right? The idea that organizations, large-scale organizations, are moving workforce administration and payroll to a SaaS model is still relatively new. So the short answer is it's still yet to be determined how clients are doing this because it's happening right now. I think, though, if we see the examples that we're seeing now, I think the key question comes in is, does the client want to look at not only SaaS, but also, as Mary Beth talked about, business process outsourcing? If they're looking at outsourcing the entire model, then you can ask the provider to take on that configuration layer, so that responsibility then can move to the provider. If the client's not interested in that and they want to retain that process but just get into the software, then it really starts to become the identification of the folks sort of on the HR side that have the technical aptitude and the folks on the HR side that have the HR aptitude, right? So it's not the deep programmer and it's not the pure business analyst. It's those people that sort of sit in the middle. Those are the really good candidates to help move this forward from a configuration standpoint. And clearly remember, too, that just because a client wants to implement workforce administration and payroll in a SaaS model, they still have that potentially that on-premise software is still sitting there. Now, a lot of times what we see is the reason clients are talking and are calling us is because they're facing a significant upgrade and they don't want to, they're wondering if they should upgrade. Even if they choose not to upgrade and they choose to move to a SaaS delivery model, there's still a significant amount, months and maybe years of time to turn down that solution because of how embedded it is within the organization. And that's also a key part of the TCO analysis is how quickly can the client turn down the old on-premises model and turn up the new software as a service model. So I don't see any more questions that have come in at this point. So if there's no more questions, I'd like to thank the Outsourcing Institute and Mary Beth, and especially all of you for joining. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to talk with us about this really exciting subject. I believe our contact information is at the end of the deck, and Mary Beth and I would love to hear from you and get your feedback on this topic. So with that, we'll close it out. David, I don't know, is there something else that we need to do to formally close it out?
No, that's pretty much it. Just want to thank Stanton Jones and Mary Beth Civic for their presentations today on behalf of the Outsourcing Institute, and thanks to everybody who's listening in.
Thanks all.